You're listening to Paranormal Optimist. My name is Stephanie, and in this podcast, we dissect paranormal topics from the perspective of skeptics, believers, and everyone in between. At the end, it's up to you to decide. Are you a paranormal optimist? Thanks for joining me again on another episode of Paranormal Optimist. I'm really excited to dive into today's episode, but first, I just want to remind you that you can find out how to follow the show on socials through the links in the episode description. If you have an episode suggestion, a collaboration idea, or have a paranormal experience or story you'd like to share, please send me an email to paranormaloptimist@gmail.com. As promised at the end of episode 1, today's show features an interview with an expert from the scientific community, a longtime friend of mine and all-around impressive, kind, and just generally amazing person. Dr. Rihana Bokhari took time out of her incredibly busy schedule to humor me today with a discussion about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. So let's jump in. All right, everyone, welcome to the interview portion of today's episode. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Rihana Bokhari. Thank you so much for joining us, by the way.
Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to join you today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So I thought for this episode, we'd use a straightforward Q&A format. Everyone's already heard my opinions and research on this topic from listening to the first episode, and that comes from a layperson and an enthusiast. This is just an opportunity to hear from someone else. A note about today's questions, I compiled this list based on some suggestions from a group of paranormal fans of another podcast, and I'll post the link to that group and that podcast in the episode description. That show's incredible, so please check it out if you have the time. But I just wanted to point out that some of the questions came from there, not all of them, but a few of them did. So, Rihana, I know that you are no stranger to interviews, and you've done a bunch of interviews, but have you ever done an interview like this before for a paranormal podcast?
No, this would be my first.
Well, that's great. That's really exciting. And I really appreciate you taking a break from your incredibly important work to humor me today. So would you mind just introducing yourself for us today?
Sure. And thanks so much for having me today. This is a fun topic to talk about, especially when we think about sciences. So my name is Rihana Bokhari. I'm the Scientific Research Director for the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, which is a mouthful. We are a cooperative agreement with the NASA Human Research Program. And essentially what we do is fund science research that's high risk, high reward, and think to reduce the risks to human health in ways that are different than what NASA is currently doing. So we try to be the other arm to help do things in a slightly different way. So I like to, I spend most of my day thinking outside the box. And I'm also, with my other hat, I'm at the Center for Space Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, an assistant professor there, and the Department of Education, Innovation, and Technology. And that's all of my pieces. It's a really long thing. Oh, and I have an adjunct appointment at Arizona State University in the School of Earth and Space Exploration. So that's
amazing.
It sounds fun, but it just means that I have a lot of extra responsibilities.
That doesn't sound fun.
But it's fun times. I really find thinking about the world and the universe and trying to think about how we can get humans into space, keep them healthy. That's my day job. My day job is supporting research to help figure that out and help move the needle in that way. And so when Stephanie asked me if I might be interested in doing this podcast, I said, well, that's a little outside of my normal everyday, but it's still something that we need to think about when we think about life beyond what we think about here. And so I'm really excited to talk to you today about all the different things that I think about from just the scientist side.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm so excited that you're able to do this because, I'm a big fan of science. Like, I think I say this in my first episode. I'm a casual fan of science, but it's not something that I have to do every day because of what I do for a living. So it's just really interesting to hear some enthusiasm from somebody who's like actually out there doing something. So, all right. So yeah, I guess we can just dive right into the interview questions. So first question. Is there anything you'd like to share about your personal worldview and how that led you to a career in science, like how you decided that that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And like many people, when they start their careers in school and things like that, I was interested in being a medical doctor at first.
Hmm.
And that was before I kind of understood that there were different options out there. When you're younger, you kind of think of things in what you know. And, you know, I obviously
Yeah.
worked with medical doctors before and been seen at a doctor's office. So I knew that was a science-ish career. And so I'm a curious person. I've always found the world's mysteries to be exciting. And I've always thought about that decoding them would be something of interest to me. So I always like to tell people that when I was younger, I wanted to be Indiana Jones when I grew up.
That's amazing. Me too.
It's surprisingly an opinion a lot of people have. And so we all take it in a different way. And for me, that was trying to be curious about science. And I found science to be exciting. I actually first got into science through biological anthropology. So I was pre-med, and instead of going into biology or chemistry like a lot of pre-med students, I took all the recs, but I still wanted to do something a little different. And so what I ended up doing is learning about ancient human history. And in this, I became very interested in bones. And that's actually what got me into the space work, because instead of staying in the ancient bone category when I went to look for to start a PhD instead of going to medical school, I ended up going to the exact opposite and working into the space world. It was a big transition, but I'm actually not the only person that I know of that's done this that way.
That is really interesting. I had no idea that you used to like study ancient like bones and stuff, anthropology, like the show Bones. I didn't know you did something like that. So that's really interesting.
She's an inspiration.
She is an inspiration, though, for real.
Absolutely.
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because in my next episode, I talk about Avi Loeb, which we don't have to get into a discussion about him because I know he's kind of polarizing, but he is really interested in anthropology too, and he focuses on like taking an anthropological approach to possibly studying extraterrestrial civilizations. I mean, obviously, if we ever get to that point.
Assuming that we find one.
Yeah, assuming they exist and that we have the technology to find them. But it's a really interesting connection there.
I certainly think anthropology will be a piece that you think about when and if that were to happen.
Exactly. So it's a really interesting line of thought. So this next question kind of just piggybacks off of that one. So that's why you became a scientist. But then throughout the course of your time as a scientist, have there been any defining moments for you? Like any aha moments? You know, they can be big things or small things, but anything that maybe gave you clarity or an epiphany or anything like that.
Yeah. So I think it was later in my PhD career when I kind of realized that I thought I could make a larger impact by supporting science and moving away from being an active researcher in the lab and supporting science as a program officer type of role. So that's what I do now. I'm essentially called a program officer, which for those of us in the science world, we know that means that I'm the person that figures out what to fund within a particular group. And so as a program officer, in that world, in that supporting of science world, I realized when I understood what that job was, I realized that I could drive science funding and try to organize it around the things that I thought were important or try to drive the field in a different way. And so it's a really different way to make an impact in the science world, but it's one that I thought I might have a larger impact on moving the field forward. And so in a lot of ways, that has been the case. And I think I have made a bigger impact as a program officer than I would have as an independent investigator.
Well, that's really exciting. And it must be really exciting, too, to get into the field and then realize that there's completely other things that you can do. And like you said, make a bigger impact. That's always great. You know, I think we're worried that the opposite thing will happen once we enter the workforce. So, all right. Well, that's awesome. And here, I think a lot of people will be interested in this if you feel like talking about it. So how would you describe your experience as a woman in STEM? And would you have any advice for other women interested in doing what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an important one as well. So I have experienced individuals. So obviously I'm a younger woman in STEM. There are many women before me that I benefit from their experience and from the fact that they've paved roads before I ever had to get there. So I 100% know that I benefit from that. And I have not had to deal with things that other women that are my seniors and older than me have had to deal with in the workforce that would never be a problem for me nowadays because they dealt with those problems problems. And I think that's wonderful. And I hope that women coming after me don't have to deal with any problems that I had to deal with, right?
That's always the hope, right?
Exactly. We'll move the field forward.
Yeah.
But I'm obviously on the younger side. And so I've dealt with, individuals expressing that maybe I'm on the younger side or that I'm young to be where I am and doing what I'm doing. And,
Sure.
that's always a challenging thing to deal with because it's one of those things where I've never had a great way to respond to that because I can't do anything about my age or my what I look like, there's nothing you can do about those things. And in the science world, we tend to not care about those things because it should be your brain that matters. It should be how you think that matters. And we always think that. We always want to think that. But sometimes it's hard for people to get past, something when they see it or they think that might be important. My advice for people is, that's never held me back. And I don't think it should hold anyone back. If you feel like you're ready to do something, if you have the experience, it's okay to go for it, even if you feel like maybe you're a little young. Mm-hmm. My advice is to work hard. Let your work speak for itself, but remember that your work will literally not actually speak for itself. Remember that we often make mistakes of thinking that our hard work is seen by other people. You always have to make sure you tout your work. You tell other people what you've been doing. Don't lie. Tell them things you've been doing, back it with evidence, of course, but we're scientists, back it with evidence. But
exactly,
it's your responsibility to be noticed. Your responsibility to make sure that your supervisor notices the good work and hard work that you're doing. So you should be your own biggest cheerleader. And so my other advice for especially women in the STEM field, find a good mentor. I have several mentors. They have been absolutely stellar and helped me move my career forward and understand how to get through obstacles. And they still give me guidance today. Those mentors are never going to go away.
I really like the advice you gave about being your own cheerleader. I think that's something that a lot of people need to hear, even if they're not in STEM. I just think a lot of us don't want to be aggressive, but you have to be. You have to be aggressive if you want to make any changes.
You have to be assertive.
Well, I really love the answer to that question. I think a lot of people will like to listen to that. All right. So in my episode, in episode 1, I give a really truncated summary of how much science has progressed throughout history. And I talk about how we as humans, we used to kill people and jail people and ostracize people for having different beliefs. And I know you pointed out that we still do that, and that is true. But I think we can argue that things have gotten better. It's not perfect. There is a lot more stories I could have included in the episode, but I only focused, I think, on 3 individuals who were persecuted. And the thing is, these people were persecuted for these beliefs that were different, but history has proven that they were correct about their beliefs. So I'm just wondering if throughout the course of your work, if there's any particular hangups that you have to navigate when it comes to embracing a new idea.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think in general, when we're facing new ideas, there are barriers that everyone experiences. I would even start back to our education system. As much as I love that we have, everyone can get education in this country, and that is a wonderful thing. Our education system, it's not really serving people to meet the modern needs of society. In a lot of ways, we're not teaching people to think for themselves. One of the best things I think you get out of doing a PhD is to learn critical thinking and critical learning and thinking for yourself. And you have to solve problems, and out of necessity, you learn how to break down evidence and scrutinize it. And I think that's something that is missing in a lot of earlier education in our country and probably around the world. It's probably not just us. It's probably everywhere. And maybe we need to revamp how we think about education. That's one thing that I felt in my career. When there's a new thing I need to learn, I feel like I have the tools to do that. But that was not something I always had the tools to do. And so it took experience and practice in putting myself outside of my comfort zone to learn how to do that and learn how to actually tackle that type of new problem. And even now I'm thinking in my day job, I'm thinking so I have this new problem I have to tackle. And now I'm going to start thinking about new ways to tackle that problem. There's known ways to do it, but now I have to think about what is the way that no one's thought about. And that's what I want to be doing. That's the exciting work. That's really fun. But you don't start from nowhere with that. You have to practice. Yeah. And practice makes perfect with those types of things. And I think another thing that we always have to challenge ourselves with, and I have to challenge myself with this, and I feel like this is something a lot of people have to challenge themselves with, is remembering to not think inside the box. box. So we often think that we kind of know everything because, we know so much more now than we did
Yes.
years ago. We know
Yes.
so much more now than we did 100 years ago. I
Yep.
mean, we know so much more now than we did 10 years ago. Like 20
Yeah.
years ago, we hadn't sequenced I don't even know when we started sequencing the human genome, but that's something recent.
It's crazy.
It's very recent.
I listened to a podcast about that recently, and I couldn't believe it was like within our lifetime that we learned all of that information.
Exactly. Yeah. And now you can sequence a human genome in a short period of time for a significantly reduced amount of money. And so we're going to start being able to use those things in a healthcare world, in a discovery situation, so much more effectively than we could even 5 years ago. And every year it'll get better, which is so exciting. But I think sometimes we think and we forget to be humble about the things we might not know and to wonder about the world. I mean, there's so many things in the world to admire and to see as exciting and new, and to think outside of what our current box is, because that's how we advance.
Yeah, I think that is a challenge that I've seen as a trend in my research, is when people who are very established maybe don't want to spend the energy in wondering, or like spend the energy in considering new ideas, because it's just so much easier to fall back on what we think we already know. So I think that's a really good point. All right. So for the next one, part of my episode was to break this debate about the possibility of life into separate discussions about why people do believe and why people don't believe. And I think both sides had really compelling arguments. And obviously, none of us know for sure. So if you don't mind sharing, where do you fall on this debate, and what would it take for you to change your mind?
That's a really fun question. So when you were telling me about this episode, I was excited about it because I think that there's a lot of possibilities to think about here from like a science perspective and a thinking about the future of life perspective. So, and where we might be in like 10 or 15 years, 20, 30 years, maybe even 100 years. So I believe there's a possibility of life outside of Earth, outside of what we think of as Earth. And the reason I like to think that is because I'm an optimist. And I think it would be pretty exciting if we found other life in this universe. Now, what form that would take, I don't know, right? I mean, Hollywood has made us think about the little green men on Mars. Yep. I think we've had some rovers on Mars for a while. I think maybe we would if they were there, but I don't know. Maybe they're good at hiding, or maybe they're microscopic. I mean, who knows? So do I think that it will be that form? I am skeptical about that, but I'm also skeptical about a lot of things. But from what we know about life on Earth, life formation was a 1 in a million shot, right? But the universe is full of planets. It's a huge place. And so a 1 in a million shot might happen more than once, Exactly. And we've identified evidence of water on Mars. And water is one of the key things you need to support our life here on Earth. But the way we support life here on Earth might be pretty different than supporting life in other places. I mean, there might be totally different kinds of life out there. So to change my mind, I would look for evidence, right? If I was thinking about changing my mind, I don't know what that evidence would look like right now. And I don't know that we're going to see it in my lifetime. I mean, although I can find evidence of water on Mars in my lifetime, so maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to be wrong. This is one of those things that if I'm wrong about it, I'm excited. It should be very amazing. But the difficult thing in this type of situation is that, like many things, it's really hard to prove that there isn't life anywhere without doing a thorough search of that universe. Defining life as broadly as we possibly can, which I think we can dive into how to define life if you want, but I don't know if our imaginations can quite expand to what possibly that might mean,
Exactly.
So there's a lot of possibilities there, which is why I want to be an optimist about that possibility of finding life.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how I feel. I mean, obviously, I'm an optimist. This is Paranormal Optimist. So obviously, that's how I feel. But I agree with you. The older I get, the less optimistic I get that we're going to discover definitive, irrefutable proof within our own lifetime. And that's very sad. I will deal with it, but it's very sad. So that's the only thing I don't feel optimistic about. Yeah, just the sheer numbers. The sheer numbers is what gets me. And we have a hard time imagining other life because we have nothing to compare ourselves to. We can't really imagine outside of what we know when it comes to something like this. So I think whatever we do learn in the next several decades will be really interesting. And who knows, maybe something crazy will happen, but I'm not getting my hopes up.
Never know.
In a recent interview, I think people will be really interested in this. In a recent interview of yours that I watched, you spoke about the health difficulties associated with human space travel. It's a really fascinating topic. Would you mind explaining that a little bit more for us?
And thanks. This is my bread and butter. I love talking about space. Mm-hmm. We've been doing human space travel. We, as in the space community, NASA obviously does the majority of the space travel. But I am not NASA, but I work in conjunction with them. We as in humans have been doing space travel for a while. And despite that fact, though, there are difficulties. Despite those difficulties, we're pretty good at dealing with those difficulties. I could probably spend a couple of hours telling you about human health risks to spaceflight, but in brief, basically, the human body adapts pretty well to space. And especially when you take into account mitigation methods for exercise that helps us to limit disuse bone, muscle, and cardiovascular system losses. Those really are those real disuse situations negatively affect the body in a long-term situation. But when you're up in space, actually, you don't really need a lot of bone and muscle to resist the non-gravity that's there. So it's something to consider is that when you leave Earth's atmosphere, your body is affected by that. You first get up into space, you have this fluid shift. Your body no longer has gravity pulling blood and fluid down to your lower extremities like you do here on Earth. And that causes this shift of fluid in your body. So you have like an excess of fluid in your head. You lose a bunch of fluid just through the normal process through urination. But you can almost feel like you have a little bit of a cold. Astronauts tend to have a high probability of what's called space motion sickness, which basically makes you feel a little nauseous or flu-like symptoms for a few days while they adjust to being in a new place. And that is partially caused by a neurovestibular change. So when you're here on Earth, you have gravity to help you understand where the ground is, where the ceiling is, where the walls are. And when you don't have gravity as a signal anymore, your body basically has a really hard time understanding what's up and down. And that makes a lot of people pretty sick. It usually astronauts adjust to it after about 72 hours. The majority of people have no problem after that. Those that don't just take some meds and things like that to, alleviate symptoms for a while. But then, once they're up in space and they've kind of got their bearings, then they're good to go usually. And NASA has protocols that astronauts do to limit their disuse loss, the bone, muscle, and cardiovascular system losses. And then there's lots of other things that happen over long periods of time that we work really hard to find solutions for. The big problems that we actually think about when it comes to human health, we are pretty good at low Earth orbit now. And we're actually pretty good. We were pretty good at lunar when we went to the moon. So there's not as many risks there. There are risks, but there's not as many risks to have good solutions for. But the big problems, the big questions come when we start talking about going to Mars. When you go to Mars, you have about a 6-month transit. And then this is the design reference missions that are kind of out right now. But when we're thinking about planning for Mars, it's about a 6-month mission, about a year and a half in the Martian vicinity or on the planet's surface, and about 6-month return time. That's a long time to be away from people. And so your biggest concerns may actually be in terms of teaming and potential interpersonal conflict or psychological conditions that could occur. And NASA does everything they can do to train and team and keep astronauts as healthy as possible physically and also behaviorally. But obviously, if you locked anyone in a tin can for 3 years, they might have problems. And so even our most elite people might have a hard time with that. So, and the best ways that we have to mitigate those are all about connection to Earth. So learning how to autonomously function is one of the biggest things we're working on right now, and autonomously care for people, which actually plugs us back into Earth, which is really important when we think about caring for people in rural environments of not only our country and the US, but all around the world. Helping people get the medical care they need in places where they might not have every tool. We will be in a pretty austere environment when we go to Mars. So we won't have every tool. You only can take what you can carry. So we're probably going to learn a lot about giving people autonomous healthcare that might help us then back on Earth and maybe develop tools and technologies that will help benefit, that in our attempt to hit this next goal will hopefully benefit us here on Earth.
I think that that's one of the most important reasons to keep exploring space, is to make life better here. But I think a lot of people just don't think about it that way. But the way you're explaining it, I mean, yeah, how can we guarantee the safety of people who are 6 months away? You know, I don't even know what the distance is. Do you know what the distance is?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, that's fine. How can we guarantee the safety of people traveling to Mars, you know, if we can't give appropriate health care to people who are just separated by, you know, an ocean?
Yeah.
So,
or just a little further from a hospital, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I still live in Michigan. You know, how do you get care out to the rural area, you know, if they live outside of Detroit, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So. All right, so building on what we were just talking about, you know, this whole discussion reminds me of some of the barriers which explain why we have not made contact yet with other life. Specifically, it reminds me of the Great Filter Hypothesis, which I talked about in episode 1, and the Fermi Paradox, which obviously I also talked about. I talked about that one a lot. So do you think space travel is possibly just too taxing on living organisms, or do you think it's just an obstacle that we will eventually overcome?
I think it's a great question. I think sometimes when we hear about space travel in the news or hear about, you know, things that might go wrong, we often hear the bad things. But the reality is we as humans have had continuous human presence in space for quite some time during the whole lifetime of the International Space Station, which has been, you know, a long time. And so and I don't remember exactly when the space station went up, but we've had people on space stations and lunar missions long before that. So we've had actually a lot of experience with space travel in this early sliver of space travel time. But we've had a lot of experience, and that experience thus far, we're pretty good at the actual being in space thing. You know, the biggest risks that you have to human spaceflight is actually the launch and landing.
Yeah,
so the
terrifying.
Rocket launches are the scary part, really. And that's actually where most of the fatalities come from when it comes to space, as far as ones that we can identify. And so it's an obstacle, of course. Going to space will always be difficult, but I think it's one that we can overcome. And I suspect that our species, as our species has done many times before, we will adapt. We will adapt. And I think we're just actually pretty new to it. Space travel is new to us.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it took us a really long time to figure out how to make boats work. It's like, it took us probably a really long time to figure that out.
Yeah.
I suspect space travel will similarly take us a long time to get really good at, but even though we're not that great at it yet, we're still pretty good at it. So I say we'll adapt. That's my guess.
Yeah, I think we fail to comprehend how far we have progressed in our lifetime as a group, you know, as a living civilization, whatever you want to call it. We're young. I mean, in terms of how old the universe is, we are incredibly young. And, you know, who knows what the normal timetable is for that sort of thing, if there is a timetable for it. So just look at what we've accomplished in the past 30 years, and it's staggering, in my opinion, which, you know,
it is.
I don't know what that's worth, but
it's staggering in my opinion, too. So I'm with you on that.
All right. So the next question, I kind of combined two things here. So a long time ago, you suggested that I should watch Three Body Problem on Netflix, and I did, and it was great. If anybody's interested in a great sci-fi show to watch, that's definitely one to check out. A bit violent, very violent, but really thought-provoking. That show brings up a good question, I think. We have these projects that we have worked on, you know, trying to get the idea out into space that we exist. You know, we are here. And things like SETI, we're looking for transmissions of beings, I guess, trying to contact us. You know, with Voyager, we're sending out this message into space, letting people know, like, hey, we're here, and we'd love it if, you know, you'd come and visit us. Just make yourself known. Not everybody thinks that's a good idea, though. And that's kind of the question that Three Body Problem raises. What do you think would happen if we ever did detect a signal, or if we detected a signal right now? What do you think would happen right now? We find proof that there is a technologically advanced civilization out there. They know we're here. Do you think society could handle that?
It's a really interesting question. And I think, as I said before, I'm an optimist. So I'd like to think that we would, as a society, as a globe, rally together and respond positively. It probably depends a lot on what the nature of the reach out is by this other potential technologically advanced civilization. I mean, it could be very clear. I mean, we saw, most of you have probably figured out, while being a spaceflight researcher and technical expert in this area, subject matter expert, I'm also a nerd, and I really enjoy.
We're all nerds here.
Exactly. I really enjoy sci-fi, and honestly, sci-fi becomes sci-reality, and it takes time, it takes research, it takes lots of effort. But I think to ignore the fact that people have brought this vision of a potential of something doesn't mean that it's impossible. So, I think it's great that we have a lot of examples in sci-fi about how humans might interact with a extraterrestrial species coming to them. For one example, just because it was 4th of July recently, I watched Independence Day. And that is
such a good movie.
Excellent. As a great example of people rallying together because we're attacked, and that could happen. And it could also be that you have something like an arrival situation where people work together to solve a mystery and figure out what an alien species is trying to tell us. And maybe they're coming on a humanitarian mission. So it really, and we've seen in our human history the different ways people have interacted with different civilizations when they encounter different civilizations. And I'm not sure our human history gives us a lot of enthusiasm, or we have done it wrong many times in our history. I think that is very clear. And so hopefully we will maybe learn from what's happened in the past and try to, figure out the right way to respond. I'm sure it will depend a lot between how the people on Earth feel about this. So I'm sure there'll be a divide between people who assume the worst and some that want to approach it peacefully. And so I think it will be interesting to see how our leaders choose to help us approach that, because it will, unfortunately or unfortunately for us, we'll be at the mercy of our leaders from around the world. It won't just be the US, it will be and all the other countries in the world, because if a group is coming that's extraterrestrial, they're coming for the whole world. It's not just
they're not really going to care about political lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I don't really know how to answer that question. I think it's terrifying. Not the aspect that there's somebody out there. I don't think that's terrifying. I think the way that we might react to it is terrifying. So I'm not very optimistic when it comes to that sort of thing. But that's why I thought Three Body Problem was so good. So I don't want to spoil it. I mean, it's obvious that that's what that show is about. It's in the sci-fi category. You read the explanation, that's what it's about. But I think it asks a lot of great questions, and it poses a lot of great possible problems that there could be with finding this out and intercepting that type of signal. So really scary, really scary, but a really good show. I can't wait for the next season. It's probably going to be a few years. So
I think just because things are scary doesn't mean that just because something's scary doesn't mean that we shouldn't approach it in an exciting way. So
100%.
Scary and exciting at the same time.
I think most important things are probably scary. Most important things that we need to learn or we need to do are probably scary. You know, that's just part of growing up. I sound like a mom now, but there's a good reason for that. So this kind of goes back into something we were talking a little bit about before. So I have a plan in the future to do a completely separate episode about the topic of UFOs, UAPs. I wanted to make sure that this episode didn't really discuss UFOs at all. It just discussed the possibility of life. Because in my experience, that's where it breaks down for people. People can be okay with the possibility of life, but not that UFOs mean that life has visited us. And I totally understand this distinction, because one of them is far away and safe, and the other one is here. And it goes back to evidence, that sort of thing. So I want to do a completely different episode about that. And during that episode, I will probably dive deep into the recent congressional hearings, but those are so dramatic, they might be their own series of episodes, honestly. I've started doing the research and it's a lot. But there was one phrase that came from the most recent hearing that I thought we could discuss, and you kind of touched upon it already. I think it was Elizondo who said something to the effect of, we need to start rethinking our definition of what life is. So what's your take on that? Do you think that there's a possibility that the process of evolution on a different planet led to life arising in a form that we can't even recognize as life, or we wouldn't be able to recognize as life?
Yeah, I think that's a really astute question. And I like to be open-minded about this, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background about why we should be open-minded about it, because even here on Earth, we see lots of life that's different. So to assume that the way life formed on this planet is the only way, I don't find that to be a very open-minded perspective, especially since we talked earlier about this being, life happening here on Earth. We assume it's kind of like a 1 in a million thing. And we got the soup together and it formed DNA. And then, that's how we got organisms and life. And this concept is really exciting, but it begs the question, could it have gone a different way? Could it have formed a different way? And there's no way for us to know the answer to that question right now. There are people that are studying this, so I won't scoop them. They should tell you about it. But, like we're a carbon-based life form, which means that, carbon is a primary element of our human structure. And it's a big piece of DNA, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, but that's basically our backbone of our entire life structure. So we think of certain parameters as being important for life because we need them to survive.
Yes.
And we survive, like we're 70% water, like you and me. So we need water to survive. But, not every organism needs that. So here on Earth, there are actually organisms called extremophiles that can live in extreme environments of temperature and pressure that would kill most of the living organisms you can think of here on this planet. And also one that I like to think of particularly and that we study a lot from the space context is tardigrades, for example, because they can actually survive in the vacuum of space, which is something humans certainly cannot do. And so clearly there are organisms that we even know about that we can find here on Earth that can survive in ways that kind of are very wild for us to think about and even wrap our own heads around from just things on Earth. And so knowing that makes me think that there are potentially other kinds of extremophiles. And do I think if we were to find life in another part of the universe that it might be microbial or something similar to what we think of as microbial, or which is very tiny, or it could be just a different thought. I like to think outside the box. We have to think outside of the box and be more expansive about thinking about what different forms of life might be and how they might be surviving. So maybe they don't survive on water. Maybe they survive on methane, or maybe they survive on some other kind of like substrate. Maybe they don't eat the same types of things we eat. So we think of planets in the habitable zone. So which is like a certain zone away from a star that is the likelihood of being habitable for life the way we think of it. It's very possible that life the way we think of it is too small of a box to put it in. It's certainly a place to start, and probably something that we should start at if we're thinking about our own purposes as humans and we're thinking about where we might want to expand to or where we might want to go in case the Earth needs an escape plan. We do have to think about that.
Yeah, eventually that is going to happen. So.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, certainly right now, our best case scenario is staying here.
Yes.
It is still very hard to
eventually
survive.
the sun will not be viable, but who knows if we will still exist at that point.
Yes. Yeah, it is much more likely that Earth will certainly be around for a long, long time. But yeah, so I think, thinking outside the box, even here on Earth, it shows us that outside the box is something we see here on Earth. And so I can't imagine that that's the only way life can exist. So there has to be more outside the box, and maybe we just can't think of it yet.
Yeah. So it was really a really interesting takeaway. So we'll see. I think it's a really compelling point.
Absolutely.
All right. So this is pretty much the last part I had for my questions. And then if you have anything else to add, definitely jump in. So I have what I'm going to call a short spiel about AI, but knowing me, it's not going to be short. So just bear with me. I have some things I want to say about AI. And then at the end, I do have a question for you. So I am not a huge fan of AI. At least not in the way it's currently being used. I've worked for companies, and I currently work for companies where there's a lot of discussion about using AI as a tool to make my life as an employee easier, that sort of thing. But then when you go to the company town halls, you see that the AI is really being used to replace people so that they don't have to pay so many people to do these jobs. So that's the obvious feeling that I get when AI is discussed in that context. And then there's another problem, obviously, with the current debate about AI created art and whether or not it's ethical to use AI as art. Even if you are an artist, whether it's ethical for you to be using it to help you create your art, that sort of thing. There's another implication of AI, though, that I think a lot of people don't talk about yet, and it bothers me in the realm of this podcast specifically. With AI-generated image and video content getting better every day, I wonder how quickly we are going to get to the point where we will no longer be able to trust anything we see submitted as evidence of unknown phenomenon. How will we be able to vet evidence when literally everything can be faked? I mean, anyone can use an AI generator now to create an image of whatever they want, and they are starting to get harder to identify as AI every single day. Every single day they get better. It's insane. And it's a frustrating reality that even if you can get photographic or video evidence of something, you really see it, you really capture it, it could just be dismissed as AI generated. Or obviously, probably more damaging is that you have to become increasingly more suspicious so that you are not fooled by something artificial. So just in general, it seems like the rise of AI is going to be a bad thing for uncovering the truth, but it does have its place. It definitely has its place. Some people I've discussed these questions with have pointed out possible applications in the search for extraterrestrial life using AI, because AI has the capability to review and compile data far more efficiently than any human scientist. So I'm wondering if you have seen any useful, not damaging applications of AI in your field, or if you've heard any possible uses that could be used in the future.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really exciting area, but it's also fraught with lots of difficulties.
Yeah.
So these are great questions and things that we need to be asking ourselves as a society. I mean, this is a wave that's hitting us right now. I mean, and if we ignore it, we will pay the price. And so, I think the points you brought up are really, really important. I know I don't have all the answers, but it's something that we struggle with in the science world, especially in the space science world. One way that we deal with evidence and things like that in the science world is actually, because there are people that try to publish fake results, and there are people that try to do that all the time. It's actually a real problem.
Oh, wow.
It is. You would think that more people have scientific integrity, and many people do.
Yes.
Most people do.
Sure.
Sometimes falsified things are just not replicatable. And so, it's not necessarily that it was intentional. Sometimes it's accidental.
Sure.
Sometimes, but there are also people that are intentionally sharing false science or creating false data. And there are examples of that all over the place. But one way that publishers, work to create transparency is basically they have authors archive and store their data, in a specific place so that other people can go in and do the same analyses again and see if they get the same results. Also, we repeat science as much as we can. Especially when the next group is trying to build on that initial discovery, they'll often rerun the original experiment and see if they get the same results. And we've actually found in a lot of situations that sometimes you get a result in one place, and just because you're in a different environment, your result might be different. And so that's not necessarily an intentional problem, but it just happens to be that the environment is causing a different response. And so the reality of the science changes, and it's not necessarily because someone lied about it, but it's because there's nuance, and trying to identify that takes critical thinking, it takes energy, and it takes time. And now with something like AI and the way it's being presented to all of us, we are all basically going to be asked to put our energy and time into figuring out if something you're looking at is real or not. And hopefully our leaders in Congress and especially in or governing bodies around the world come up with ways to help regulate this so that it can help people make those decisions. But, I guess we will see technology tends to advance faster than governing bodies tend to be able to govern them. So I guess we will see this little race. But when I think about this from a science perspective, I always think in my day job, I read a lot of proposals for science. There's a tendency from people these days to say, I'm going to throw AI at it.
Yeah.
The thought is we're going to run an algorithm. We're going to do machine learning. We'll make a neural network. And when I look at that, the first thing that comes to my head is, okay, let's think about this for a second. What are they training the model on?
Mm-hmm.
What data are they using to train the model? It's very important because your model is only as good as the data you're training it with. And sometimes that's not clear. And so, that's one of the things that I see a lot is that, there's not always sufficient data or information to train a model. And this is not as much of a problem when it comes to models using like the whole World Wide Web, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of data there to train something on. But when I'm thinking about it specifically in healthcare perspective or how to reduce a risk for spaceflight, well, there's not a lot of data there. There's usually not a lot of data. And so you're talking about creating a model to train it on something where there's not a lot of data. And so that can be a real problem. So sufficient data to train a model or the data that you use to train a model. Facial recognition software is a really good example because especially when it was first created, it was created using a lot of white males as the individuals that they were recognizing. At first, the model was trained that way. And so the model is significantly better at recognizing white males then. And hopefully, by now that we recognize this as a problem that has been fixed, especially since a lot of us use things like Face ID now. And hopefully the technology advances, but sometimes you have to find those problems in iterative methods. In a healthcare context, we want to be able to use AI to help support physicians and things like that. I think it's even physicians, start worrying about, is this going to replace me? Will this replace your flight doctor when you start thinking about a spaceflight context? When I can't call my flight doctor, when I'm an astronaut on my way to Mars and I have a 20-minute time delay each way, if I call my flight doc, it's hello, and then I wait 40 minutes for them to say hello back, for me to receive their hello back. Well, that's not great. So maybe we need another way to have an autonomous, capable AI or something like that can simulate some of what the doctor can do. But will that artificial intelligence ever be able to really do the exact same thing a doctor does? I think we're very far away from it. We need a lot more data the human brain actually does put together a lot of data together very quickly. And we do that really well. You pointed out a really good point that there are massive, massive reams of data, especially in like astronomy or the human genome, where for a person to go through all of that, it would take a long time. And so AI is going to be really helpful for us for detecting patterns. But I still think it's going to be humans that will be better at understanding what those patterns mean.
Yes.
So I think there will end up being a lot of a partnership between humans and AI. And it may be that in the future, for all of our jobs, we have to learn how to use it in our job and use it for that purpose. So I think, it's a changing world. And it's one of those things where I would say that people have to start getting used. It's probably not going to go away.
Yeah, it's not.
We have to know where it's useful and where it's not useful. So just assuming it's going to be the magical fix, I think is premature.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely not going away. So we just have to learn how to utilize it correctly and learn how to live with it, I guess.
And use it ethically.
Yeah, use it ethically. For sure. Yeah, I think ethics in AI is going to be a huge issue moving forward. I mean, it already is. But I mean, again, from science fiction, we see that it's probably going to be a huge issue, just looking at our own history and how we have dealt with things that were new and that sort of. I don't really want to get into it, but I think it's really important for us to think right now about the ethics in AI. And I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Well, let me give you a really quick example of where I think, we've actually done well and we need to kind of advance. So we saw the writing on the wall when it came to genomics. When we started sequencing the human genome, there's now this act from a congressional act called the GINA Act, which basically doesn't allow you to be discriminated in your workplace by your genetics. And this is actually something that is really, really important. And it's wonderful that our governing bodies were able to think ahead enough to do that.
That is wonderful.
Yeah, it is. And it's not a perfect law. It doesn't protect everything. And it could be expanded, should be expanded now that we've seen things like 23andMe go out of business and sell the data. That obviously could happen in a lot of situations. So I think they need to continue to develop those types of laws. But it's great to see that they have done some things. And now we're looking at them to hopefully take the same type of courage and boldness for things like AI.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. But yeah, for today, that is all I had for you. Is there anything you'd like our audience to know or anything you'd like to plug or promote today?
Yeah, well, I think spaceflight is very cool. And so please support spaceflight. I know that for a lot of people, not everybody thinks of space as helping them, but I hope I gave a couple examples of why we still should continue to be curious. Pushing the envelope is important for us to improve technological advancements for us here on Earth. Also, be curious. We're trying to push our human species to the next level. That thought process doesn't just apply to spaceflight. Be curious about lots of things. I encourage all of your listeners to continue to be curious. Doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. Being curious is really important. And if anyone's interested in STEM fields, I encourage you to follow your interests. I know that sounds scary because you're trying to think about what you should do with your career, what you should think about and which direction to go in. You find something cool. Follow something that is interesting to you. Sometimes it won't lead you where you expect. It didn't lead me where I expected it would, but you'll probably enjoy yourself a lot more along the way if you're interested in what you're doing.
I think that's good advice. I really hope you enjoyed my interview today with Dr. Rihana Bokhari. Again, Rihana, I simply cannot thank you enough for your help with this episode. It was so much fun. For you, the listener, I wonder if hearing another viewpoint changed anything for you. How do you feel about the possibility of extraterrestrial life? I'm still an optimist, but for me, that was never going to change. Hopefully, we'll be able to incorporate discussions like these in a lot more episodes in the future. If you'd like to participate in a future episode as an expert or an enthusiast or even as a witness, please reach out to me at paranormaloptimist@gmail.com. Please also send an email if you'd like to share a paranormal story for the show or suggest an episode. Go to the episode description to see where you can follow the show and check out some highlighted sources for further information. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Paranormal Optimist. This show is written, produced, and presented by me. My name is Stephanie. The music in today's episode was obtained royalty-free from Purple Planet Music. See you next time.